To help give some context to understanding therapy, let's look at the character of Connell in the book Normal People by Sally Rooney to explore how the therapist in the book addresses Connell's depression and anxiety and guilt, as well as kind of how I might approach it as an individual, So as my own practice, how I might approach it. And I just want to say, before we jump in, this conversation is going to include conversations of mental health, including depression and anxiety, as well as, feelings of not wanting to be here, as well as a character in the book actually does take his own life. So if that's not a conversation you want to be a part of, please just click off the video. And also, if you haven't read the book and you intend to and don't want any spoilers, you might want to come back to this video later, as some things might be, spoiled for you. And so now that that's all the way, I just want to say that every therapist is an individual. We bring our own values and our life experiences and our own judgments. And judgments can be positive, by the way. Like, for example, I truly believe that people are incredibly capable of healing no matter what we've been through. That is a judgment I have. That is a bias, but I think that it really promotes healing. And so every therapist is different because they're an individual, regardless of their models. Whether they're a therapist that offers cognitive behavior therapy or internal family systems or anything else, they're going to bring their own personhood to the therapy. I don't agree with the idea that we can be blank slates. And in fact, I don't think that that's actually helpful for clients. I think we're all want a human being to connect with, even if it's not a friendship or a personal relationship that will continue. I think we want that human experience, especially with AI coming into therapy, which is a whole different conversation. But I just want to note first that every therapist is different, and so your needs are going to be unique as well because you're an individual. And so some therapists you're really going to click with, and others you're not. You might have loved the description of Jillian, Connell's therapist, in Normal People, and that's wonderful. Like, you need to really figure out what kind of therapist you connect with. And that includes sometimes going to see different therapists before you find your right fit. In my own life, I saw at least 5 different therapists at different times in my life before I found the therapist who really helped me heal and mature and get to the next level of my life. Like, I truly believe without the therapist that I worked with who helped me change my life, my entire trajectory would have been different. He really helped me transform my own life. So in the book, Connell eventually seeks therapy through his university, through the support of his friend. His friend encourages him to do that. And he fills out an assessment. It's very clear that he is struggling with depression after his friend Rob dies by his own hand. Of course, I'm using some language to soften it because of the algorithm. So I don't want to be insensitive though. Like, I think that there is a power in saying the word, but I want you to get this information, and so I'm going to use the language I need to. I would first really thank Connell for showing up to therapy if I was his therapist, and validate it takes a lot of courage to show up and fill out an assessment like that. Like, those questions in I think it was the Beck Depression Inventory, are some really heavy, serious questions. I know he feels strange just handing over the paperwork to the receptionist who seems, really unemotional. So I would thank him for, his honesty, validate that coming to therapy is a big decision. Of course, I would explore what brought him there. I would not really focus on the paperwork first, like might glance at it, but I really want to know from him what's going on. And right away we learn that Connell's friend, who had died, he's feeling a lot of conflicted emotions around it. He's also experiencing thoughts of not wanting to be here himself, and he's having panic attacks as well. And I would normalize all those things. Like, it makes sense why you feel depressed. It makes sense why you feel like you don't want to be here. Like, it sounds like things are really overwhelming. I think sometimes it can be really scary as a therapist to hear these things when people no longer want to be here, when they're really struggling to live. But I would just say it all makes sense. Thank you for your honesty. And I'd really go into his complicated emotions. And this might not all happen in the first session, but I'd really create a space that for his expression of emotions. Something that I've found in my own work that I kind of, picked up on is that my clients who are experiencing a lot of panic attacks, and some clients I work with, they've had daily panic attacks, or, they're having panic attacks like 4 or 5 times a week. And when I see that, I always know, this isn't just fear or anxiety I'm working with. This is a client who has a buildup of emotion, that there is so much going on inside of them that they haven't been able to process for whatever reason. And now it's coming out, in this incredibly painful, stressful way, the hyperventilating and all of that, because this energy, this emotional energy needs to come out now. And so I really believe in creating space for emotions, because I don't think anxiety is just about fear or depression is just about pain. I think it's about a buildup of emotion. And there's research that validates this perspective. So alexithymia, it's a really big word, or kind of big word, and it just means if you have difficulty identifying your emotions or putting them into words, describing them. So, these are the people who if I asked you, what do you feel? If you were like, I don't know what I feel, or I'm happy, I'm mad, I'm sad. You don't have a lot of ways of knowing what you're feeling. That's alexithymia. And really, Connell's experience in his life is fixated on other people's judgments and wanting to perform for other people, and he, for example, his whole relationship with Marianne in the beginning, he doesn't let himself experience that fully because he's so afraid of other people's judgments. And so he's not a person who's in the habit of checking in with himself. He's more in the habit of going, what do other people expect from me? And I'm gonna live according to that. That's one way, for example, as well, that codependency shows up. And codependency, I talk about it a lot, but it's really a pervasive experience in cultures where we're told that our worth is dependent upon other people's validation of us, and their approval, perfectionism culture, hustle culture, all of this, it makes sense. And I know this book takes place in Ireland, but there's a lot of perfectionist pressure on Connell as well. And so then I'd really want to create space. What does that grief feel like in your body? What does that guilt feel like in your body? And yes, I would totally validate, just like Jillian, his therapist in the book does, that it is not his fault that Rob died, and that he didn't reply to him a couple years ago on a social media message. But I would still allow him to feel that guilt, it's not your fault, and you're allowed to feel guilty. That is a human experience. You're allowed to feel that. How does that feel in your body? He might go, I don't know. And then I'm like, what's going on inside of you? What's going on in your chest, in your belly? And he might go I feel like a gnawing in my belly. Okay, just breathe into that. And then I kind of would have him breathe into that and then pull back. You don't have to sit with it, but we just have to start making a little space for it. And in my experience, the more that clients learn to make space for their emotions when they're depressed and anxious to the point of having panic attacks, the more they do that, eventually those symptoms subside because they're processing their emotions as they come up. We're kind of dealing with the back catalog of emotions in sessions through all these different ways, including journaling and breathing, letter writing, which I'll talk about in a moment, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But the more we make space for these emotions, the lighter people feel and the more present they are, which is kind of like the opposite of anxiety and depression, if you've ever experienced that. That fixation, that rumination, that obsession, when we can live in the present, that's true healing from that. And so I really encourage that dialectical experience. It's not your fault Rob died, and let's go ahead and feel your guilt. To cope with his and then anxiety and depression, with the anxiety I talked about, really feeling. With the depression, one of the things that is contributing to his depression in the book is he's talking about his sadness or grief over his old life that he can never return to it. Now that Rob's died, he's gone off to school, people have moved away, he can never go back to his old life. So his grief with Rob is also tied up to grieving for his old life, you know, and it wasn't perfect, but it was an important chapter of his life. And so to help cope with his grief and these conflicted feelings around guilt, to make space for his emotions, one technique that I might use with Connell, I probably would, especially since he's a writer, is I would pull in techniques from narrative therapy. So narrative therapy is all about the stories that we tell about our lives. And one example of a narrative therapy technique is we look for exceptions. So if I say, you know, no one ever wants to date me, but then the exception is, but actually there was someone in high school who really pursued me and they seemed like a great person, like that would be an exception as an example. But letter writing is something I love to do with clients, especially those who are very expressive. There's some clients, and I do find that this is common with alexithymia. They might not be comfortable voicing their emotions, but they might be good at putting things on paper. So one letter I might have him write is, what would you have said to Rob? What would you say to him now if he were in front of you? Write a letter to Rob now. Yes, I know he's passed, but write a letter to him. Express to him, like, you can say you're sorry that you didn't reply to him. You can, let him know what he meant to you. You could also write a letter to your younger self about the chapter that you're going through, the chapter that you now grieve. Like, what do you now know, looking back, that was really special about that chapter in your life? Let that younger self know about it. Or imagine like a future self writing to you now. Maybe in 10 years, you know, you're in a much more grounded, happy place. Like, imagine writing to yourself a letter to you now. Validate what you're going through, let yourself know it's understandable, give yourself encouragement, all of these different things I might have him do. And then also to go back to that guilt, like, I would also have him validate for himself. He could do this in a letter or just in talking out loud. Why didn't you reply to Rob? Why does it actually make sense you didn't reply to him? And in the book, he has really conflicted feelings about this person. He's in many ways kind of a hurtful person. And so he might say, you know, I just really am trying to be around people and nurture relationships that are supportive. And my friendship with Rob really wasn't. And so I understand why I didn't reply to him. I'm sad about it now. Like, looking back, I didn't know how much he was struggling, but I have to give myself understanding and maybe even forgiveness, you know, like make peace, let go of judging myself for not replying to him. And then to go back to this idea of grief, you know, write the letters to Rob. But then also when people are grieving, I like to encourage them to make space to cry if they're out of their numb or anger, like, you know, then have them cry about it. Like, even if Connell could cry for like a moment in session and then he pulls back, I'm like, I always say, like, you're doing the most powerful work right now to just honor and move your grief, you know, make space for it. And we want to make sure it doesn't get stuck, because then that will just feed the numb, which feeds the anxiety, which feeds the depression especially. And then, you know, we can also explore his spirituality. Connell doesn't really talk about this at all in the book, but what do you believe happens to us when we die? And if Connell has a belief system about an afterlife or God or a higher power, we could pull that into our work, because then he might even go like, well, I do think Rob is in a different place. And so then he could even maybe ask for a sign. Sometimes people like keeping track of the signs they get from past loved ones or past acquaintances. Like, every time I see a feather, I know it's Rob now, and I know he's forgiven me, and I know he's part of, like my guardian angels now. Some people believe that, and if that is what he believes, then I would support that. Of course, I'm never going to push that as an agenda as a therapist. So that's not my right. I don't have that right to kind of push that, but if that's part of their belief system, I'm going to support that. I think spirituality is a beautiful coping skill for grief. In my own life, it is one of those most solid anchors for getting through deep loss in my own life. So I would support that, but if not, then I would say, okay, let's then maybe create a ritual around Rob. For example, what did you learn from Rob? So you had some conflicted feelings about him, but what was his gift? What lesson did he give you, Connell? And maybe Connell might say like, he really taught me to be playful, to maybe I'm more serious than him and I could be more playful, as an example. And so maybe Connell could be conscious about pulling in more playful energy into his life, making time to play a game, for example. Go watch a sports game, to, make jokes, listen to comedians. Maybe he could make more space in his life for playfulness, if that's the gift Rob gave him, to honor Rob's life. And you don't have to be spiritual to do that. Finally, talking about his depression, and his anxiety, I would not rush to recommending medications like Jillian does. I definitely give it at least 3 sessions of working with someone to figure out where are they at. Do they just need to start processing their emotions? Because it's okay to have thoughts of not being here. When you feel a lot of pain, that makes sense. I would also be asking him, why haven't you died? Like, why are you still alive? Like, I would really be highlighting those reasons. And he might say like, I'm super excited about what might happen in my career. I feel hopeless today, but I'm so excited to see what might happen as a writer. Like, I'm applying to grad school. I'm hopeful about that. And then I would just really encourage those reasons for living. Like, it's a both and. Both things can be true. So I wouldn't rush to talking about medications, or unless he had told me like, I'm, planning it actively. I have access to things. Like, that's a whole different thing. But that's not where Connell's at. So I wouldn't rush to medications, because first I want to see what he's like, help him feel again. And medications can interrupt that ability to truly create space for our emotions. I think that if someone's really struggling, there's definitely a role for medications. I definitely encourage them at times for clients, depending on where they're at. But I love this idea that I learned in grad school, where medications can be like a life jacket if someone's drowning. If they're having daily panic attacks, they're drowning, they can't function, they can't shower, all of these things. Medications can be a life jacket, but, for anxiety and depression, not things like bipolar, which is considered more chronic, lifelong, but some things like anxiety and depression, then therapy is what helps them get to shore. So it can be a both and. But I wouldn't recommend it in the first session. It would definitely take a few sessions for me to kind of see where he lands as we work on some of these concepts. Then with the depression, he has, like, right before he goes to therapy, he has a night where he lays on the floor because he can't even get himself into bed. And everything just feels heavy when you're depressed. It's like walking through mud. And so I would then first validate that. I would then start to explore the most basic, bare minimum self-care. What I have found with depression is one of the things that helps, and I'm also someone who's in recovery from 20 years of serious depression, which included thoughts like this. I would say, okay, like, it's really hard for you to function. You're still going to classes. That's amazing. But how are you taking care of you? And he's like, I'm not eating. I'm not sleeping well. I'm laying on the floor. I could say, okay, could we just spend, like, maybe you just bare minimum self-care. When you get home in the evening, maybe you are not ready to eat. Maybe you don't want to drink water. But maybe you just do the bare minimum, which is you put yourself into your bed the moment you get home, so you don't have to spend the whole night on the floor, which reinforces feelings of shame and powerlessness. That could be literally the bare minimum. We just want one incremental small change. So even if he doesn't eat, he's still thinking bad thoughts, maybe he's scrolling on his phone. If he's at least laying in bed, he's not like in the worst of it. And then I might encourage things like, we're gonna build up, like taking a 5-minute walk, stretching a little, that helps make space for our emotions, drinking some water, eating a nourishing meal, even if it's just once a day, like in between classes, he eats something nourishing, like wonderful. Like, we're gonna just start with some basic self-care. I find that finding routine and basic self-care really helps pull us out of depression, in addition to creating space for our emotions. And there is research as well that working on our diet, and I don't mean like restricting, I mean how we nourish ourselves, like, reducing sugar, for example, not in this like disordered eating way, but reducing sugar, fried foods can help our mood as well. So I kind of explore that with him in like little bits. And, I know as well that one of Connell's core wounds, and this would come out in the course of therapy, is that he doesn't feel belonging. He talks about that in his therapy session. And what I know to be true is that totally makes sense given the fact that not only did he not know his father growing up, he doesn't even know who he is. And so that kind of experience can make us go, oh, that person's half of my DNA, but my mom thinks there's something so wrong with him that I can't even know who he is. Am I bad too? Am I a bad person too? It can make us struggle with attachment as well when we don't have that primary attachment figure of our father. And so his non-secure attachment, the way he is back and forth and, ultimately is leading Mary on makes sense, in this context. So I'd help him explore this lack of belonging, maybe write a letter to his younger self, I know that you wonder who your dad is and mom won't tell you. Validate those emotions. I'm here for you now. Dad was never there for you, but I'm here for you now. And then we'd really emphasize that self-care. And finally, I would just like to say every therapist is different, but in the book, Jillian gives him a worksheet or some worksheets at the end of his first session. And I did that earlier in my career, but what I like to do now at the end of sessions is I tailor the homework to the individual client. It's not just a worksheet based on anxiety or self-care. It's really what's going on. So I might say, okay, you've done so good, Connell, exploring your conflicted emotions around Rob today. Why don't you write a letter as part of your homework, validating to yourself why you didn't reply to him? Maybe that can help you forgive yourself. Or maybe I might send him a 5-minute meditation that he can do on self-forgiveness just to contemplate that. And so each session I kind of tailor it based on that. Or maybe one session it's okay, you have really been struggling this whole week with laying on the floor. Your bare minimum homework this week is to just lay on the bed when you get home. We start where people are at. We don't want to, I think when I was a young therapist, I gave people too many tools right away, but depression is numbness. Depression is frozen, that trauma state. And we want to help people kind of warm back up bit by bit. And there's research that validates that human nervous systems co-regulate each other. So what I mean by that is just by me being present as having a regulated nervous system could actually make Connell's nervous system more regulated. And so that's why as a therapist, it's so important to me that I practice self-care, because I'm lending out essentially in these relationships a regulated nervous system. So if I'm in fight, flight, freeze, my clients can't co-regulate with me. And so really just by creating a space where Connell's getting to share with a person who's regulated could help him start to come back up from frozen. He might feel more feelings of anger eventually. That's kind of going back up to fight or flight, and then feel more safety. And then, I also just wanted to say, talking about the nervous system, that Deb Dana, the therapist who does a lot of work on polyvagal theory, which is all about our nervous system, she says that trauma replaces patterns of connection with patterns of protection. So as human beings, we're designed to connect. But Connell's isolating more. He's hiding out more. He doesn't have a lot of close relationships. But that all makes sense kind of with the buildup of not knowing his father, of, kind of the living for other people's expectations, the sense of feeling like an outcast in a school where money is so prioritized, where he, doesn't have the same resources. All of these things can be wounding trauma, and all it means is wound, to his, sense of self, to his nervous system. And so it makes sense he's going to be isolating more, which is a key feature of depression. And so if he can just show up for sessions, my most depressed clients, if they can just keep their session with me, let's say we're meeting weekly, and they could just keep that, that's incredible progress, because a lot of times people with depression struggle just to keep that appointment. But by keeping that routine, by keeping that relationship going, they're moving out of that frozen state, which is depression. And so just by showing up with a therapist you trust, you literally could be healing your nervous system and your depression. And, research shows that it's your relationship with the therapist that's most important. And all the models, like internal family systems, are all kind of secondary. And so this was just kind of my exploration of Connell and normal people and his experience with therapy. I'd love to hear what you think, what are your, thoughts on the therapeutic process? What's worked for you? What hasn't? Like, what did you think of Connell in the book? Like, anything that this conversation inspires you to chat about, I'd love to hear it. I'm truly am here for you. I love connecting with you, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next book unpacking video. And until then,